Everyone has a favorite Pokemon. This could very well be yours. A horrible choice, by the way. I beg you to pick any other Pokemon. This one is actually the worst. Conversely, every Pokemon is someone's favorite. Well, almost. According to a Reddit study done in 2019, these 4 Pokemon are actually nobody's favorite. But that study was done 4 years ago, which is like 27 internet years, so I'm sure they're someone's favorite by now. Right? Even GameFreak has a favorite Pokemon. It is literally all over the franchise. If you've ever consumed any Pokemon media, then you know this Pokemon. If you ask your mother to name a Pokemon, this is probably one of the 2 she can actually name. It's the Pokemon everyone loves to hate. It's the dragon Pokemon that's not a dragon type. Who's that Pokemon? It's Charizard. Charizard is definitely the poster child for Game Freak. When you talk about Pokemon that get special treatment, Charizard is the first name to come to mind. And don't get me wrong, I love Charizard. I totally get the hype. It is an awesome Pokemon, but it is truly everywhere. If Game Freak can put Charizard into something that is Pokemon media, they will find a way. Ever since it was created for the very first generation, Charizard has been adored not just by Game Freak, but by fans all across the globe. We can clearly see this when we look at polls like the one I mentioned at the beginning of the video, which was conducted by fans on Reddit. In that poll, over 52,000 people responded and Charizard came in first, which shocked nobody. There was also an official poll ran by the Pokemon Company itself in 2020 in celebration of Pokemon Day, and in that poll, Charizard actually came in 4th behind Greninja, Lucario, and Mimikyu. Either way, Charizard is clearly a fan favorite Pokemon, and if they did another poll like that today, it would not shock me if Charizard came in first place. Especially since Greninja is getting deleted and retconned by the Pokemon Company itself. But if you want me to do a video on that, make sure to let me know down in the comments. I'd love to do a video on the Greninja deletion. In fact, the video you're watching right now is happening due to subscriber comments, so if you like videos like this and want to possibly influence videos I make in the future, then make sure to subscribe. Either way, as much as fans love Charizard, nobody loves it more than Game Freak and the Pokemon Company at large. And that is what I want to talk about today. I want to take a look from Generation 1 to now and discuss many times where Charizard was given special treatment and show that it is in fact Pokemon's favorite Pokemon. I'm sure many people think I'm going to start with the fact that Charizard is a box art Pokemon even though all the other generations have legendaries as their box art Pokemon. But that's really only the case because legendaries being on the boxes wasn't a thing until after Generation 2, and even Blastoise and Venusaur are box art Pokemon, so no real favoritism going on there. Charizard favoritism isn't really a thing in the Generation 1 games, as all 3 Kanto starters have the same chance of being in the spotlight depending on who you pick in the game. Although they did make one a dragon from the very start, which is a huge reason why Charizard became so popular, so there might be some underlying bias and favoritism in the design department for Charizard. Back then, we really see the favoritism for Charizard start to shine through in the anime. While Ash did catch all 3 Kanto starters and Pikachu, none of them evolved into their final form except for Charmander. And it didn't just gradually evolve over time, they ran at warp speed to evolve it so they could show Charizard off to the audience as soon as possible. Charmander actually had the fastest evolution to a final form out of all starters, going from Capture to Charizard in just 35 episodes. Which is extremely fast for a Pokemon belonging to a trainer who is notorious for having starters that don't evolve. Shortly after it evolved, it began disobeying Ash's commands, showing just how strong and untamable this Pokemon was, making fans love it even more. That was of course until we were introduced to Charla and the other Charizards in the Charcific Valley, where we learned that Ash's Charizard was in fact super weak compared to these monsters and had to stay here and train. This, of course, just gave them a great way to call back Charizard whenever he was needed. The best examples include his return in Johto to fight Claire, Gary's Blastoise, and Harrison's Blaziken, his Battle Frontier battles where he became Ash's first Pokemon to beat a legendary, his return in Unova where he did literally nothing, they just needed to have some sort of interest in the Unova anime with its rough ratings, and finally the greatest Pokemon return of all time. This moment lives rent-free in my head. I mean, he sees Ash in trouble on the TV, He takes off at Mach 10 speed, swoops in right in time, and then squares up against an enhanced imagination-powered legendary. This is peak anime. Sorry. This just goes to show you the impact that this Pokemon had on the anime. The anime made this not only one of Ash's most popular Pokemon of all time, but one of the most popular Pokemon to appear in the anime, period. And before you head to the comments and hit me with, Game Freak doesn't control the anime, I know that. That's why I said Pokemon Company at large earlier. The rest of this video is going to be about Game Freak. The anime favoritism towards Charizard just can't be ignored. Don't make me timestamp and ratio you in the comments. The in-game favoritism for Charizard really began in Generation 2 with the champion of the Johto League, a Dragon-type master who could have used Kingdra, the new Dragon-type introduced in the Johto region, but nope. Why do that when you can instead use Charizard? None of the other starters were even used by gym leaders, but they made sure Charizard was on the Dragon Champion team instead of an actual Dragon-type. But this is far from the only time that Charizard has made it onto a champion team. Charizard is actually the most common Pokemon to appear on champion teams, appearing on 4 separate ones: Lances, Reds, Blues, and most recently, Leons. While we're on the subject, let's talk about Leon's Charizard for a moment. If you've watched the channel for a while, or you follow me on Twitter or X or whatever you want to call it, which you should, then you know I am a big fan of Galar. I loved Sword and Shield, defended on Twitter, and occasionally caused some Twitter-wide discourse about it. However, these games are not without some big flaws, and one of the most common complaints I see is about Leon's ace. They could have given Leon any Pokemon to be his ace, a Generation 8 Pokemon, a new evolution of an older Pokemon like Sirfetch'd, but instead, they gave him Charizard. This is just blatant favoritism. The champion of a new region has a Gen 1 Pokemon as his ace. Don't get me wrong, I love Leon. He's one of my favorite characters in all of Pokemon, and his Charizard is super cool. But it is absolutely crazy, even to me, that a Charizard would be his main threat. Which leads to the next point, the Charizard forms. The first example is even before Gen 6, before Gimmicks, and before Megas even came around. It began for Charizard in Generation 3, or even arguably Generation 2. Everybody knows that shiny Pokemon were introduced in Generation 2 and that their colors were chosen by a method that's too complicated for me to get into in this video. But there are 2 truths that I want to talk about when it comes to Gen 2 shinies. The first one is that they were not manually chosen, and that's why we get some that barely shift like Shiny Gengar and Shiny Dugong. And the second is that black was only used as a shading color for Generation 1 and 2, and that's why there are no black shiny Pokemon in those generations. Black shinies didn't actually become a thing until Hoenn with Pokemon like Rayquaza. But if that's true, why does Charizard have a black shiny? Well, in Generation 2 it wasn't a black shiny. The method I mentioned earlier gave Charizard a purple and green shiny in the Johto games. So while Pokemon like Zapdos are stuck with the same bland shiny colors for the rest of time, Charizard was given hand-picked shiny colors to make it even cooler. So if this was given to Charizard in Generation 3, why did I say arguably Generation 2 earlier? Well, it seems Charizard was always meant to have a black and red shiny form. This official art was actually made prior to the release of Generation 3, so they always intended to give Charizard this special black shiny form when the time arose. Shiny Venusaur still looks like this, but Charizard was given a special hand-picked shiny. Seems like favoritism to me. Now let's talk about the obvious part of the video, the gimmick forms. Not only was Charizard the champion's ace in the Galar region, but it also got a Gigantamax form in the base game, while the other Kanto starters and the Galar starters had to wait until the DLC to receive theirs. And one of the most notorious examples is that while every Pokemon that got a Mega form except Mewtwo only got 1 form, Charizard got 2. One that reflected a more natural Charizard evolution, and one that gave it its long-awaited Dragon typing. And don't get me wrong, both Mega forms for Charizard are extremely cool, but Blastoise couldn't even get a second typing with its Mega. There isn't even really much more to say about the forms, it's just favoritism. But it doesn't just end there. Charizard is really shown to be the favorite with its many appearances. It was the first raid boss battle in Generation 9, so people really didn't have to wait that long to have a Charizard in Paldea. It was the only starter Pokemon chosen to be a ride Pokemon in Generation 7. We already talked about it being Leon's ace. It shows up all the time in the anime, like with Kiawe, Trevor, Alon, Freed, Red, Clone Charizard, and Charla. It always gets into games like Pokemon Unite and Pokken Tournament. It is somehow two separate Super Smash Bros. Characters, and there is even a place in Unova that is nicknamed after Charizard, and that is just the blatantly obvious examples we see in the Pokemon franchise. That is about all the Charizard talk that I can take. Like I said earlier, I do not hate Charizard. I love Charizard. It is one of my favorite Pokemon, and it is one of, if not the best fire starter in the entire franchise. You probably also love Charizard, but nobody loves Charizard like GameFreak loves Charizard. Charizard is without a doubt the poster child of Pokemon. If you like videos like this where we talk about Pokemon from Gen 1 to the modern day, make sure to subscribe to the channel. We have lots of awesome videos coming up. As always, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will catch you guys next time when the adventure continues.